Guys, I'm Edward, a 32-year-old engineer working at a structural consulting firm. I'm the kind of guy who's quiet, reliable, always focused on making sure buildings stand strong. My younger brother, Connor, 29, is in sales. He's got this amazing charisma, can talk to anyone, and light up a room in minutes. About 2 years ago, I met Leah. She's a pediatric nurse, so kind-hearted, smart, and funny. Her kindness is genuine, not forced. The moment we met, we hit it off. By the 6th month, I knew she was the one I wanted to marry. On our first anniversary, I bought the ring. I proposed to her on a hiking trail in Asheville that she'd been dying to go on for years. She said yes even before I could finish the question. We set our wedding date for October. Both our parents were over the moon. Everything was going perfectly. Connor was all excited to be my best man, helped me pick out the ring, and accompanied me to look at the wedding venue. He seemed really into it, like a supportive brother should be. Then, in the first week of April, everything came crashing down. One Tuesday evening, I came home expecting a nice dinner and a cozy night on the couch. Instead, I walked into a nightmare. Leah was in the bedroom, her suitcase open on the bed, half packed. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she wouldn't look at me. I asked her what was wrong, but she didn't answer. When I got closer, she flinched, as if she was afraid of me. That's when my stomach dropped, because Leah had never looked at me like that before. She finally turned to me and asked, "How long?" I was completely confused. I said, "How long, what?" She let out a bitter laugh and said, "How long have you been cheating on me with someone else? Let me make this clear. I have never, not even in the slightest, cheated on Leah. Cheating is just not in my nature." So when she said those words, my brain just couldn't process it. I stood there like I was in a daze. I said, "What are you talking about? I've never cheated on you." She shook her head and said, "Connor told me everything." She told me that Connor had called her that afternoon, saying I'd been having an affair for months with a woman named Brittany from my office. He claimed to have seen texts on my phone and walked in on us at my apartment. He said he couldn't keep the secret because he cared about Leah too much to see her marry a liar. But none of it was true. There was no Brittany in my office. Connor had made up the whole story out of thin air. I tried to explain, showed her my phone, messages, call logs, everything to prove my innocence. But she was already too far gone, not willing to listen. She said, "He's your brother. Why would he lie?" And at that moment, I had no answer, because I was asking myself the same question. She left that night, called her sister to pick her up, and walked out without looking back. I called her 11 times that night, sent her long texts, pleaded with her, but it was like talking to a wall. Radio silence. The next morning, I was shaking with confusion and anger as I drove to Connor's apartment. I pounded on his door until he opened it, and there he was, smiling like he'd just played a harmless prank. I asked him, "What did you tell Leah?" He leaned against the doorframe and said, "Relax, bro. April Fools." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was like he'd just dropped a bomb on my life and was standing there enjoying the chaos. I stared at him in disbelief for a solid 10 seconds. I told him. Leah had left and wasn't answering my calls. He just shrugged and said, "So, go talk to her. Tell her it was a joke. She'll get over it." As if trust could be rebuilt so easily. I asked him to call Leah himself and admit it was a prank. He rolled his eyes, but said he'd text her later. I left his apartment feeling like I'd been run over by a truck. I called Leah again, and she finally picked up. The first thing she said was, "I don't want to hear it, Edward." I told her it was an April Fool's prank, Connor's stupid idea. But she said it didn't make sense because Connor was too detailed in his story. She needed time to think. And then she stopped answering my calls and texts. A week passed, the longest week of my life. I was a mess. I could barely eat or sleep. I went to work like a zombie, coming home only to stare at my phone, hoping for a message from Leah. Then, things took an even worse turn. One Saturday, I was sitting on my couch, half watching some random show, when I got an Instagram notification. Connor had posted a photo of him and Leah at a restaurant. Leah was smiling, a real smile. The caption said, "Good company, good food." That was like a knife in my heart. I called Connor and Leah immediately, but neither of them answered. I was so desperate that I called my mom. I told her everything: the lie, the prank, Leah leaving, and now this photo. My mom was silent for a moment and then asked, "Edward, are you sure Connor was joking?" That question made me realize that maybe this was more than just a prank. I drove to Connor's again. This time, I didn't knock politely. I banged on the door like I was going to break it down. When he opened the door, I held up my phone with the photo and asked, "What is this?" He glanced at it and casually said, "We just had dinner. She's going through a hard time, and I'm being supportive." I was furious. I said, "That's my fiancée you're being supportive with." He just said, "Well, she's not really your fiancée anymore, is she?" I had to hold myself back from losing my temper right then. I asked him if he made up the lie so he could be with Leah. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You always get everything, Edward. The good grades, the good job, the good girl. Maybe I just wanted to see what it felt like." I left without another word. I was so hurt and angry that I didn't know what to do. I decided I had to prove to Leah that Connor was lying. I started gathering evidence. I went through my old text messages with Connor and found that about 3 months before the so-called April Fool's prank, he'd asked for Leah's phone number, saying he wanted to plan a surprise birthday for me in June, but he never mentioned any birthday plans after that. A mutual friend, Adam, also told me that about 2 months before the lie, Connor had said Leah was the most amazing woman he'd ever met, in a really intense way. I also found out from my coworker Rachel, who knew Connor's ex-girlfriend Megan. Megan had broken up with Connor in January because he'd become distant and obsessed with someone else. Then he'd even called her Leah during an argument. I got in touch with Megan, and she was more than happy to give me a written statement. My work was also affected by all this. I was so distracted that my boss, Greg, who's usually as emotionless as a filing cabinet, actually noticed and asked if I was okay. I told him I was dealing with family stuff. He just said, "Take a mental health day if you need one." It was the most concern he'd ever shown, but I decided to use work as a distraction. I threw myself into a project to redesign the structural framework for a new mixed-use development downtown. It was a huge and challenging project, but it helped me take my mind off things. My friend Jake, who was my college roommate and is now a software developer, started coming over on weekends. He's the kind of friend who doesn't ask too many questions. He just shows up with pizza and a bad movie and sits with me until I feel better. One night, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting and then asked, "So your brother's a sociopath, and your fiancée got played. What are you going to do about it?" That question made me realize that I needed to stop just mourning the loss and start taking action. I started organizing all the evidence. Jake helped me put together what we called the Connor file. It had everything: phone records showing no communication with any suspicious person, Travis's statement from work saying there was no Brittany, screenshots of Connor's texts asking for Leah's number, Adam's statement, and Megan's detailed statement. We arranged everything chronologically, printed it out, and backed it up digitally. Then, my mom told me that my parents were having a cookout the next Saturday. Connor was bringing Leah, and she wanted me to come. At first, I thought it was crazy. Why would I want to see the person who destroyed my life with my fiancée? But then I realized this could be my chance to show Leah the truth. I called Jake, and he was shocked but also excited to help. He said, "You're going to walk into a family cookout and expose your brother in front of everyone." I said, "I'm going to tell the truth in front of everyone." The week leading up to the cookout, I was focused. I went to work, crushed it on the project, and came home to review the evidence. I was calm, not nervous or angry. I knew I had the truth on my side. On Friday night, I went through the Connor file one last time. I also prepared what I was going to say. Not a big speech, just a clear and calm account of what happened, supported by the evidence. On Saturday morning, I woke up early, went for a run, showered, and put on a clean shirt. I grabbed the folder and drove to my parents' house. When I pulled into the driveway, I saw Connor's truck and Leah's car. My heart started pounding. I sat in my car for a few minutes, took some deep breaths, and then walked around the side of the house into the backyard. Connor saw me first. His face showed surprise, then irritation, and finally he tried to look indifferent. Leah looked up and saw me, and her face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, discomfort, and then something I couldn't quite read. My mom caught my eye and gave me a small nod. I knew she was on my side. I walked to the center of the yard, put the folder on the picnic table, and said, "I need everyone to hear something, and I need about 10 minutes. The yard went quiet. My dad turned down the grill. My aunt put down her drink, and everyone looked at me. I started speaking in a calm and clear voice, like I was presenting a project at work. I said, on April 1st, Connor called Leah and told her I'd been having an affair with a woman named Brittany from my office. But there is no Brittany. There was no affair. Connor made up the whole story." Connor snorted and said, "Here we go again." My dad looked at him and said, "Let him talk." I opened the folder and pulled out the first set of documents, the phone records. I showed everyone that there was no communication with anyone named Brittany or any suspicious person. Then I took out Travis's statement and the screenshots of Connor's texts asking for Leah's number. I pointed out that my birthday was in June, but he never followed up on the supposed birthday plan. Next, I presented Adam's statement, and finally, Megan's statement. As I was presenting the evidence, Connor's face got paler and paler. Leah was staring at the documents, her hands gripping the lemonade glass tightly. When I finished, Leah stood up, shaking. She looked at Connor and asked, "Is any of this true?" Connor tried to smile and said, "Leah, don't let him manipulate you." But she said, "Answer the question." He didn't. She said, "You called her Leah. You called your girlfriend my name." Connor was silent. My dad walked over to Connor and said, "I think you should leave." Connor looked around the yard, hoping someone would defend him, but no one did. He grabbed his keys and walked out. The yard was quiet for a long time. Leah and I started talking. She said she'd read my email, but couldn't believe Connor would lie. She apologized for not listening to me. We talked for over an hour about what Connor had told her, how he'd slowly made her trust him. Leah and I are still taking things slow. We're seeing a couples counselor to work through the trust issues. The wedding is postponed indefinitely. As for Connor, he's been cut off by our parents. He moved to Raleigh. I got a promotion at work for my work on the downtown project. Jake still comes over on weekends, and my life is slowly getting back on track. I learned that the truth may take time to come out, but it will prevail if you're patient and have the courage to fight for it.